The US is about to enter the war between Israel and Iran. In this video, I'm going to show you why I'm so certain about it, that the US will enter this conflict. We're also going to talk about what happened in the last 24 hours, where the Israelis keep striking targets in Iran and the Iranians hit back with ballistic missiles. And we'll talk about the attempts of the Israelis to help pave the way for a regime change in Iran. All of this here in this situation report about the Israeli-Iranian War. The Iranians have now found evidence of the or proof places where the agents of the Israelis were operating. This is from the Iranian media, where you can see that they found a safe house. It is actually fairly interesting what we can see here. We see that it has a very high comparison or similarity to Operation Spiderweb in Russia. We see that those are the wings of drones that were used here. We can see one of the drones here that is lying on the ground. So the Israelis were building it there in place. And if we see the video continuing, at this point we see they had a 3D printer. So they must have produced parts in place and thus simply assemble the drones in place instead of smuggling them over the border. The Iranians also found equipment for the Spike ATGM launcher that were used likely both for the decapitation strikes as well as to hit the air defense systems. All of this is now being published in the Iranian media as a proof of what they found. We also have additional confirmations from the Iranian side about the decapitation, about continued decapitation and the killing of high Air Force commanders. The Israelis also have now confirmed that the IRGC intelligence service head and his deputy were killed. Also killed was the head of the part of the IRGC intelligence that is responsible in surveilling the regular Artesh, so the regular armed forces. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is considered to be basically the Praetorian Guard of the regime, whereas the army is less political, is more where the conscripts are also in, and thus obviously there has to be surveillance to make sure they remain loyal, and the head of this intelligence was killed. The Israelis have also confirmed that Khamenei is continued to be a potential target. Yesterday, it's still unclear. Initially, it was said that Trump vetoed a strike against Khamenei. Then it was said, no, that's not true. Then it was said again. So there is still some confusion, but the Israelis are insisting that it's still an option that is open. More damage is also being published. We see the Mehrabad, Mashhad, where the Israelis managed to destroy an aerial tanker in the northeast of Iran, furthest away from Israel possible. And there are additional satellite pictures from the Bin Kaneh base. We see here on the satellite pictures are the various buildings that have been struck. Basically everything there that was sizable of a certain size was hit. The missile base in Karam Shah was also hit. As you can see, the satellite pictures show that a lot of targets here was hit, and the Israelis have said that they managed to destroy 20 ballistic missiles, TELs, transporter erector launchers. They have the videos here to prove this, that they managed to hit some of them while they were in the process of getting ready to launch missiles against Israel. In total, the Israelis say they also destroyed 100 targets in Isfahan and managed to destroy missile storage sites as well as additional TELs, and in total they have now destroyed 1/3 of the Iranian TELs. That's at least the Israeli claim. Obviously the fewer TELs the Iranians have, the smaller the volleys they fire at Israel have to be, and thus the easier it is to defend against them. They also managed to catch several of the TELs moving around, and they also found TELs moving, while the Israelis were able to create aerial superiority in parts of the country. That is by no means a proof or allows for the claim that the air defense of Iran is completely defeated. Iran has a huge number of air defense systems, and they're nowhere close of all being destroyed. They've lost a lot of radar systems. They had decapitation strikes, and they had headquarters being destroyed. So the coordination of the air defense is completely disrupted. That does not mean the Iranians can't reorganize. And as we can see in the pictures, they were on the process of bringing additional air defense to different places. Now they will prioritize which places to defend and remain a danger unless, of course, they are being caught off guard. The Israelis show that they destroyed 2 F14 that were parked on the ground. The claim here is that it might be those that were standing in Tehran for quite a while. And while the construction site here looks like it, we see that the planes are at a different angle towards each other. So I think it was different ones where the wall just looks similar. Otherwise, those planes would have had to move. And these planes are there for years without having been moved. So they are definitely not operational. Maybe the Iranians moved them to force the Israelis to expend ammunition, but I'm not sure about this. So I think those were probably two different F-14s. Everything else does not seem to make sense. The Israelis have also struck defense industry. We have a production site for the components of aerial defense systems for the IRGC. Here, a production site for various types of missiles, a planetary mixer. Planetary mixers are being used to create the fuel for ballistic missiles, and that has been struck. And we also have a surface-to-surface missile production site. So we see that the attacks have been switched to the defense industry itself. Also, a strike on a navigation system production site, and we have a media report about this as well, that the Israelis have struck a factory that is responsible for the production of electronics technology, radar systems, avionic simulators, the guidance systems for missiles. Basically, that factory that they hit in Tehran is responsible for everything electronic that is of higher quality inside of in domestic production. Interesting enough, the Israelis also struck a helicopter support and maintenance company. We see that they now aim at different targets. Helicopters aren't really responsible for anything right now, but still they are getting hit. And there's a video claiming that this is a Heron 450 over Tehran. Now, this is a good point to mention that we are talking about a war where a lot of manipulation is both happening and also a risk. Yesterday, for instance, a video was spread around that showed missile strikes, and later it became clear that it was AI generated. Now, as we can see here in the whole video, where the Hermes is supposedly over Tehran, there's no proof of it. So this could be from Israel and just some different voiceovers being used, but it can be from Tehran as well. This is a drone that should be easy prey for an air defense systems. It doesn't have stealth, and as we can see, it's not flying in the stratosphere either. So if it can operate over Tehran, it would show that the air defense is currently completely suppressed. But as said, this might just be from a different point, from a different time. So no confirmation here. Then there's the claim that the centrifuges in Natanz might have been knocked out. We have the journalist for the Wall Street Journal referencing the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Organization. The mentioning here is apparently that with the Israelis striking the electricity supply, this destroyed the centrifuges. Now, if the centrifuges are in operation, they are rotating, I think, with 8,000 to 9,000 rotations a minute. I think I've read this. So obviously, something out of the extraordinary happening at that point can simply lead to the centrifuges destroying themselves. At least that's the theory. For me personally, there's the question, are the Iranians actually so stupid, and there's no other way to describe that they create subterranean places to guard their centrifuges and then have the electricity supply over on the surface? And if the electricity is stopped, then they would destroy themselves, and they wouldn't even put some battery packs as a backup to allow for the centrifuges to slow down and stop if the electricity stops. If the Iranians actually build tunnel systems to put their centrifuges in, but allow them to be destroyed not by penetrating them, but by simply pulling the plug on the surface, it would be unbelievable. But I guess things like that have happened in the past. I just want to say where I think this might be wrong, or that something there might be overlooked. So I'm not convinced yet that this actually worked like this. We also have a US expert giving us a chilling information here. He's saying basically with Fordo, the Iranians could build 9 nuclear weapons at the end of the first month of once they try, 13 at the end of the second month, and 15 at the end of the fifth month. I said in the first video about this conflict that there's no more reason for the Iranians to hold back with the development of nuclear weapons. They are now in full sprint towards it. There's nothing else makes sense. So even if they hadn't started developing nuclear weapons before the Israeli strikes, and I'm convinced that they did because of the reports we had about implosion tests, about missile developments, and about enrichment. Otherwise, that wouldn't make much sense. But even if they hadn't started, now they are definitely trying to get it as fast as possible. And with Fordo, according to this expert, they can build 9 nuclear weapons within 1 month. Fordo is so deep underground that the Israelis will have trouble destroying it on their own. With GBU 28, I think it is. They might at some point dig into it with bigger attacks, but mostly it's considered that the GBU 57 is needed, and that's the one that is being dropped by the B-2 bomber, for which the Israelis would need the Americans to join the war, or they could try to do it with special forces on the ground. But obviously doing that in an area that is 380 kilometers away from the border would bring its own massive risks. So the attacks of Israel are continuing. The Israelis are also have asked the Iranian population in Tehran to vacate an area of roughly 30 square kilometers, where they said basically we want you to not be harmed while we strike military targets. And one of the targets that was struck was the Iranian national television. They were looking here at a strike against Israeli targets. And as we can see, the moderator being talking here while we see the missiles hitting in Israel, and at that point the building is being struck with bombs and she is fleeing from that building. This is the video that was later taken from that building. As we can see, fire all over. I think I'm not going too far to say that it is not going to be used anytime soon again. The Israelis said, and I can just say what they said, the Israeli armed forces said that it was used for military purpose and that it was in the area where they demanded an evacuation. I have no way of judging whether that was actually used for military purpose, and I have no way of explaining to you whether or not that attack was legitimate. So I leave that to someone who actually knows better international law and all the necessary things. I'm just transporting to you what the Israelis say about that strike. The Iranians also hit Israel, and we can see videos like this where you can see from a distance the missile strikes. Interesting what we can see here. These must be the points where the missiles separate from the first stage. You can see that they are still flying here, but the coloring is different. And we can see that it was right here where the missiles here, we can even see it's like it broke off at that point, and probably the second stage was ignited at that point. So interesting from that point too to watch it. This is a missile attack from the distance, and the strikes were hitting targets in both Haifa as well as in Tel Aviv. We see interceptors rising up, and at the same time strikes hitting targets, as said, both in Haifa as well as in Tel Aviv in the last 24 hours. At least 5 missiles made it through in in Tel Aviv, and they hit residential areas. The reports were 8 people died, more than 100 were wounded. There's also confirmation now that in the Bazan factory in Haifa, 3 people were killed, 5 were killed in Tel Aviv. Now 3 and 5 obviously makes 8, but I'm not sure that those were all the casualties, all the people that were killed in this attack. So the number might have been higher in this attack alone. Roughly 12 hours ago, I found a report from the casualties on the Israeli side so far at that point, and there it was 788 in total. 21 deceased, 31 heavily injured, 13 heavily injured, 37 moderately injured, 581 lightly injured, 56 were in treatment for anxiety. It's not just missiles that are doing damage, though. If enough missiles are being launched with your own defensive missiles, obviously you will have some faulty ones as well. And we have one here on video where we see the interceptors being launched, and this has a malfunction. We see it's already turning away. And this seems to be, here's a second one launching, and we see it's also accelerating further. And I think at that point they realize it and hit the self-destruct, but it seems to not have worked in the way it was supposed to, because first of all, we see 2 pieces that are still alight, and the second piece clearly still does tremendous damage once it hits on the ground, whether it's the warhead or whether it's the fuel, the unburned fuel from the propellant. Obviously, I cannot say. Also, the American consulate was hit yesterday in Tel Aviv. The damage was done by a missile hitting close by, so not itself, and there were no casualties reported. Also, the Weizmann Institute was hit and heavily damaged. It looks to me mostly destroyed. It has a world reputation for its research being done there in the areas of cancer research, aging, AI. Numerous Nobel Prizes were achieved with the research being done there, and the pictures that I've seen seem to indicate that it's basically completely destroyed. The Iranians are now saying that the strikes, that they were in preparation for an even bigger and even stronger attack, the biggest and strongest attack in history against the Israeli territory. That was spread here with the Arab media, that this was confirmed to them to the Iranians. We'll have to see if they managed to achieve that attack, but we also see that at least one of the drones that made it through almost had the potential to do big damage. Now, this video was published by the Israelis showing that one of their helicopters was intercepting a drone. It's firing here with its autocannon on the drone, and it was analyzed that the picture actually showed an Arrow 3 launcher right next to it. Now, we see it wasn't aimed at it, but it could have done quite some damage by steering a little left. It came tremendously close to doing damage against an Arrow 3 launcher. Then we have news from the oil industry that was also struck in the past few days. Here we now have news that all tankers that are not in use, that are not needed, that are not in line to be filled up, have left the port. Whether that's because of Iranian demands, basically fearing that one of the tankers might carry drones or some munitions to strike their infrastructure there, or whether it's due to the owners simply getting out of the way in case these ports are being attacked. So at least bringing the ships to safety while they are not in the process of loading. Obviously, that's pure speculation, but this is what we see from the Gulf. Then we have further Israeli strikes against infrastructure that could help defeat a potential uprising. We had yesterday strikes against the Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Justice next to all the military targets. Now the Ministry for Intelligence and Security was struck. Also, the main headquarters for the security services was struck. It is also coordinating and commanding for these forces, not just regular police, but also the forces that would be used in domestic uprisings that would be used against this. We see that for the past few days, and obviously the Operation Rising Lion seems to be a reference to the flag of the old Iran where the lion was on it. So have that lion rise again. It seems that clearly that the Israelis see their biggest chance to get lasting security from Iran is to simply achieve a regime change. And now they are working on weakening the regime so it can no longer suppress its population and thus can be toppled. In the political sphere, we have news from Iran. Iran now says they want to negotiate. Then the news where they are asking Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman to ask Trump to pressure Israel to stop the attacks. In return, they offer flexibility in negotiations, but to my mind, this is pointless. They won't achieve anything. First of all, Trump said at the G7, the Iranians want to talk, but that they should have done that before. I had 60 days, they had 60 days. Iran will not win this war. They have to negotiate before it's too late. So he's basically saying they had their chance and they have to negotiate before it's too late. Sounds like there should be a negotiation, but what is likely the aim is a capitulation, a complete dismantlement of the nuclear program. Before that, Trump also said sometimes you have to fight it out. That also speaks volumes. We have Netanyahu also saying the Israelis are in the process of both ending the nuclear program as well as the missile program, which would then lead us to expect that probably any negotiations are bound to fail. There is no need for Israel to negotiate while they are having the upper hand, while they can operate all over Iran. And we have the confirmation here that Benjamin Netanyahu said they want to continue to have these fake talks in which they lie, they cheat, they sting the US along. So this shows that from an Israeli side, why would they negotiate? They are currently in the process of destroying everything they can. The only reason for them to stop would be a guarantee that not only the nuclear program is ended, so a complete dismantlement of everything that's not purely civilian, a complete dismantlement of enrichment and a handing over of all the enriched materials, but by now, I would guess that the demands would also be an end to the missile program, so a dismantlement of all infrastructure in connection to this. From the Israeli side, they basically can say either you do that or we make you stop it, whether you want it or not. The situation thus seems to be close to a point where Iran is getting limited options, as the air is dominated by the Israeli enemies, and we now have a situation where the US will likely intervene in the near future. Not just because Iran has stopped the negotiations until Israel stops, but Israel won't stop, because why would they? Nevertheless, regarding how we want to see Israel, how we judge those attacks, there's simply no need for Israel to stop as of now, when they haven't lost a single plane yet and are striking wherever they want all over Iran. During that time, during the strikes, Iran has no reason not to try to achieve the bomb, not to try to get the nuclear bomb. And this obviously leads to additional problems. On the Iranian side, we see now a political initiative. The parliament is preparing to leave the non-proliferation treaty, which would then both mean that the International Atomic Energy Organization can no longer check on the nuclear program on the sites, and at the same time, according to the international agreements, Iran would no longer say that they are not going for nuclear weapons. So going for nuclear weapons would be 100% legal for Iran from this point. And we see that at least the parliament here wants to say that the parliament is preparing for this. But even more important than this in regards to the US involvement is the news we had from yesterday evening. In total, 32 tanker planes were started in the US and have flown to Europe. This is a clear indication of something extraordinary happening. When those planes were popping up and minute by minute, more and more were popping up on the tracking systems, the whole analyzing community was was completely baffled. This is a development that is unprecedented. There is currently a training in progress to be started, but it's going an exercise, a maneuver, but it will involve 40 fighter jets. You don't need 32 tankers for 40 fighter jets. So what we can see here are planes that are being sent that could support the 100 to 300 fighter planes, or something between 32 and 100 bombers in different operations. This leaves only two options that are viable. Now we can construct some more options to it, but to me it only leaves two likely options from the US side. Either they're going to start supporting the Israelis with aerial refueling to allow them to operate more easily. The Israelis only have 7 Boeing 707 based tanker systems that are ancient, close to being obsolete, and this will be one of the most restricting parts for the Israelis to continue their operations, that they have to keep going to keep the air defense suppressed. They have to keep flying there, and with only 7 tanker planes, this will be a strain to their resources really soon. So either this is going to help them, and obviously a lot of additional tanker planes also allows the Israelis to increase their weapon loads, as they have a lot more opportunities to refuel, and the tankers don't have to share with as many planes as before. This allows bigger bomb loads and thus heavier strikes against the Iranians. It also would allow the Israelis to fly deeper into Iran, which, as they would have a chance to refuel further, this would allow them to use iron bombs against targets, which are not just cheaper, but in some cases also more effective than ranged weapons. But this would also help them to hunt the ballistic missile TELs, as they have to basically circle around the area and have to have a plane in several minutes distance. If one of those TELs pops up from an underground situation, is being spotted while getting ready to launch the missile, there has to be a jet in range, at least within afterburner range, to strike that TEL before it has launched. And for that, you have to have planes there circling all the time. And that only works with enough tankers. So this might be the involvement of the US, that they will likely start to support Israeli strikes really soon, and thus enable the Israelis to strike deeper, to strike harder, and to hunt the TELs longer. Or we see this as a beginning for US direct strikes getting involved. I already mentioned the Fordo enrichment plant, where without the US involvement with B-2 bombers and GBU-57, it's going to be a hard challenge for the Israelis to strike that. They can theoretically dig themselves through. They did something similar against Hassan Nasrallah, where they simply used several F-15 to throw a lot of bunker busting bombs at the same place and thus dig ever deeper with it. But Fordo is a huge installation deep underground, so this would take them quite a lot of effort, and thus also at the same time be predictable. And that's something you do not want your enemy to know, where you are going to keep striking, because this allows the Iranians to bring in additional air defense. This allows the Iranians to prepare and thus allow them higher chances of intercepting planes. Whereas a B-2 with GBU-57 can drop 2 of them at the same time, and this is the highest chance to strike Fordo. This is not a guarantee yet of the US getting involved, but according to what I see with those tankers, I expect probably an 80% likelihood of the US getting directly involved. Whether it's just going to be with tanker support or with direct strikes, I'm inclined to expect direct strikes. No guarantee from my side, but this is the reason why I think the US are getting involved. And that's not even all, because we also have the confirmation now that the carrier strike group around the USS Nimitz has now started to move to the Middle East. So there's going to be a second carrier again ready to strike Iran. Again, we see additional US assets being sent. Now let's talk about the consequences about the US involvement. Iran will basically have 2 options. They can capitulate. They have to give up, accept international control, international monitoring, people checking their installations to make sure they are going to be dismantled completely, from the centrifuges to handing over all the enriched material. They would have to accept that when they capitulate, because that is what likely Israel and the US are going to demand as a capitulation. This would be a huge embarrassment, and it would be would be a disaster for the government, as it would show both domestically and internationally how they got defeated so easily. But they could have had that without war as well. So this might lead them to have some kind of sunk cost fallacy. Basically, we already suffered such heavy losses. Should those losses have been in vain? Shouldn't we even try to fight back? And if that is happening, then Iran will likely escalate. If they don't avoid fighting against the US, then Iran strikes back. Now, while Iran only has a certain amount of missiles left to strike Israel, they have a lot more short-range ballistic missiles that have no chance of reaching Israel, but they have a chance of reaching the US bases around the Gulf, be it in Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. They are all in range. If Iran is being attacked by the US and they decide to strike back, and they already threatened that, then of course those missiles strike in other countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council, which then might lead to them intervene and starting to fight against Iran as well. The result of that would probably be Iran striking the oil resources as well, so oil fields, refineries, terminals, etc., all of this. And of course Iran would likely try to close the Strait of Hormuz. This is something that Iran is basically threatening for decades. It would lead to increased oil prices, as 20% of the world's oil and 20% of the world's LNG is crossing through the Straits of Hormuz. This would not just lead to higher oil prices, thus to higher inflation and to shortages, and then to unemployment, as economies would take a hit out of this. This would also allow them to basically blackmail and punish the Gulf states that are getting threatened by this. But at the same time, while Iran is preparing for that for decades, the US are also preparing to stop this, to stop an Iranian attempt to do that for decades. And that might be one of the reasons why we recently had A-10s being sent there. They would probably be one of the perfect means to strike the small speedboats with both missiles as well as the autocannon, as they can fly fairly slow and have a good loitering time while being robust as well, so they can take a hit. So we might see the reason why A-10s were recently deployed to the Middle East as well. Nevertheless, there's still an option to de-escalate. There have been reports that Iran offered to restart the negotiations with the US, obviously, but I do not see Israel accepting anything but a capitulation, anything but a clear end to the nuclear program of the Iranians, and the US will likely not accept anything else either. So if we come to a conclusion, Israel is now trying to keep its air superiority by continuing the suppression of enemy air defenses, and with the hope to at some point achieve air supremacy, which it has so far not achieved. Iran still has a significant number of air defense systems, but they have lost effectiveness due to lost radar systems, due to lacking coordination. The decapitation strikes, the strikes at headquarters, etc., will make the air defense less effective. And this has to be maintained. Israel has to keep striking to achieve that at this point, as the Iranians can reorganize themselves. And if the Israelis get complacent, this will allow the Iranians, even with obsolete equipment, to become a danger. I don't think nobody needs to be reminded of the Serbians being able to shoot down an F-117A in the Balkan Wars, because the flight path was always the same and they became predictable. So Israel will keep striking this, and we will continue to see attacks against the air defense. The easy-to-hit nuclear program targets seem to have now been all struck. This seems to have led to some change of priorities. As said, attempts to dig through underground systems would kind of make it predictable, and this is dangerous while the Iranians can reorganize their air defense. So now we see a change in targets to more towards air defense, and also the fact that the Iranians managed to get missiles through that killed Israelis also had led to a more significant shift towards the ballistic missiles, both in defense industry but also in storage storage facilities, installations, etc. The Israelis are also using the current situation to strike the defense industry. There have been numerous wars in the past where the Israelis have been stopped before complete victory has been achieved due to international pressure. And by now, when they strike defense industry, we see the strike against a helicopter repair facility. That is completely irrelevant or mostly irrelevant to the current situation, but it will weaken Iran's military in the long term. And we see Israel having shifted to this, even if there's not going to be an overthrow of the current system and a friendly Iran possibly afterwards. They want to make sure that Iran is not going to be a problem again anytime soon, and thus they destroy the defense industry as well. Thus the extension of the strikes towards the defense industry, and we'll have to see at which point Iran is going to act in some way. But for Israel, there's no reason to accept a compromise right now. In worst case, they can just do it like they did in Syria. They suppress the enemy air defense, and then they just come over weekly whenever they feel like it to strike additional targets. They now can do this into Iran as well. Once they've degraded the Iranian air defense big enough, they could just come weekly and strike attempts to rebuild situations. They could strike construction sites if they feel like it. As soon as they've achieved air supremacy over Iran, and they are in the process where they might achieve it at some point, as soon as this is done, they can just come and go as they please, even if it's in the coming months, in the coming years, or in a decade. So for Iran, I do not see much of an option but basically to swallow the bitter pill and accept the dismantling of the nuclear program and probably the missile program as well. Otherwise, the regime is in serious danger, especially if the Israelis continue like this. They can keep striking the oil industry as well, which will degrade the possibility for the Iranians to even keep their power plants running, as 90% of them are thermal and gas power plants. Without them, the Iranians will have massive blackouts in the country. They will have inflation, even higher inflation. The economy will collapse, and with it, probably the regime. So if the regime wants to save itself, I do not see another way but to capitulate. One other result is Erdogan has declared that the Turkish missile arsenal will have to be extended to achieve deterrence as well. So this is a lesson that Turkey is reading out of this, and apparently he wants deterrence against Israel. This is another conflict that is now brewing over Syria, which we might talk about in the near future. If you like the situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.